Welcome to Listen to English. This narrative is designed specifically for C2 proficiency level learners. It features complex sentence structures, abstract vocabulary, and psychological concepts to challenge your listening skills. If you feel this level is not suitable for you right now, or if you prefer a different pace, please check our channel playlist to find content ranging from A1 to C1 levels. In today's session, we are revisiting the ancient myth of Icarus. However, we won't just look at it as a story of flying too high. We will explore it as a psychological pattern-examining ambition, the traps of intelligence, and why success sometimes leads to disorientation. Before we begin, if you find this content valuable, please support us by liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more advanced listening practice.
There is a particular kind of failure that rarely looks like failure at all. It does not arrive through incompetence or ignorance. It appears in people who are capable, articulate, and intellectually alert. People who understand systems, notice patterns, and think several steps ahead. From the outside, their lives often look functional, sometimes even impressive. And yet, internally, something begins to fracture. They abandon paths that once mattered to them. They exhaust themselves without understanding why. They repeat behaviors they have already analyzed, explained, and intellectually outgrown, not because they lack insight, but because insight alone does not protect against misdirection. This is where many intelligent people become confused. They assume understanding is the same as alignment. It is not. What follows is rarely dramatic. There is no single breaking point, only a slow and quiet drift away from meaning. This pattern has been described in modern psychology using many different terms. But long before it was analyzed, it was observed, and it was preserved in story form. One of those stories is the myth of Icarus. But before the myth appears, something else must be understood. Pressure. Modern life places a very specific kind of pressure on intelligent individuals. It suggests, subtly but persistently, that value is conditional, that worth must be justified, that potential must be proven, that standing still is indistinguishable from falling behind. Over time, ambition stops being a direction and becomes an escape from ordinariness, from irrelevance, from the fear of being unnoticed. This is usually celebrated: hard work, high standards, relentless drive. But what is praised externally often feels different internally. Urgency replaces curiosity, intensity replaces clarity, and eventually, motion replaces meaning. This is the psychological landscape in which the myth begins to matter. The story itself is simple. Daedalus, a master craftsman, builds wings for himself and his son to escape confinement. Before they fly, he offers a warning that is precise and limited. Do not fly too low. Do not fly too high. There is no speech about discipline, no lecture about obedience, only an acknowledgement of forces beyond understanding. At first, everything works. The flight succeeds. The escape is real. And with each moment above the ground, something subtle changes. The world below becomes smaller. Distance creates perspective, and perspective begins to feel like control. This is where the story quietly turns. Not because of rebellion, not because of recklessness, but because confidence begins to detach from awareness. Icarus is not punished for wanting more. He is undone by confusing capability with immunity. In psychological terms, this is the moment when ability hardens into identity. He is no longer someone who flies. He becomes someone who is defined by flight. And once identity is at stake, limits no longer feel neutral. They feel insulting. Modern life offers countless versions of this moment. It appears in people whose intelligence becomes their primary defense, in those who believe that reflection alone exempts them from consequence, in individuals who assume that because they understand risk, they are therefore protected from it. But understanding does not cancel exposure, and awareness does not eliminate gravity. What makes this pattern difficult to recognize is that it often produces short-term success. Momentum increases, recognition follows, silence replaces feedback, and silence is easily mistaken for confirmation. Today, Icarus does not fall from the sky. He burns out quietly. He grows detached while remaining productive. He continues performing long after coherence has been lost. This does not look like failure. It looks like competence without direction. And this is why the myth persists. Not because it explains collapse, but because it describes how easily ascent can become disorientation. There is more happening here than ambition alone, and this is where the story becomes uncomfortable. Because the next part is not about flying higher, it is about why some minds resist limits even when they understand them. There is a reason this pattern appears so frequently among intelligent people. Intelligence is exceptionally good at explaining things after they happen. It is far less reliable at preventing certain outcomes before they unfold. This is not a weakness of character. It is a structural limitation of the mind. The mind does not observe itself from the outside. It experiences itself from within. And when intelligence becomes central to identity, it begins to protect itself. This protection rarely looks like denial. It looks like reasoning. Fatigue becomes a temporary inconvenience. Emotional distance becomes maturity. Dissatisfaction becomes evidence of high standards. What might be a warning in someone else is reframed as discipline in oneself. Limits are especially difficult to accept under these conditions. A limit suggests that effort has boundaries, that control is partial, that not everything responds to intelligence. For someone whose sense of self is built around competence, this feels deeply destabilizing. So the mind does what it has learned to do best. It reframes. Overextension becomes ambition. Rest becomes laziness. Reflection becomes indulgence. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, pressure replaces orientation. This is why so many intelligent people remain in motion long after they have lost clarity. They are not confused in the usual sense. They are misaligned. Modern culture quietly rewards this misalignment. Speed is praised more than direction, visibility more than coherence, productivity more than meaning. In this environment, stopping does not feel neutral. It feels dangerous. So people continue. They accumulate achievements without integration. They move upward without recalibration. They succeed in ways that feel increasingly hollow. This is not failure as society defines it. It is something more subtle, an erosion of internal coherence. The myth of Icarus returns here, not as a warning against ambition, but as a reminder about orientation. Daedalus does not forbid flight. He cautions against extremes not because they are immoral, but because they are unknowable. The sun represents something very specific, not danger, not punishment, but forces that do not respond to intelligence. The tragedy is not that Icarus ignores the warning. It is that he no longer understands why the warning exists. This is precisely what happens when limits are interpreted as personal challenges rather than structural realities. Modern examples are everywhere. Careers that accelerate faster than identity can stabilize. Lives optimized for output but disconnected from experience. People admired for their drive but privately unsure why they continue. They are not lost in the sense of being directionless. They are lost because they are moving too efficiently in the wrong direction. And efficiency once achieved, is difficult to question. This is why collapse is rarely sudden. It arrives as numbness, as chronic dissatisfaction, as a quiet sense that something essential has been bypassed. At this stage, insight alone is no longer sufficient, because the problem is no longer a lack of understanding. It is an absence of orientation. And orientation does not come from thinking harder. It comes from listening to signals that intelligence has learned to ignore. Ancient myths were never meant to instruct behavior directly. They do not tell you what to do next. They show you what patterns repeat. The myth of Icarus survives because it does not moralize. There is no villain, no betrayal, no punishment imposed from outside, only a consequence that emerges naturally. This is important because it suggests that the danger is not ambition itself, but unconscious ambition, movement without awareness, expansion without integration. The myth does not argue for restraint. It argues for relationship, a relationship between capacity and context, between effort and environment, between identity and limitation. In modern psychological language, this is often described as integration, the ability to hold multiple signals at once, to value performance without becoming consumed by it, to move forward without abandoning coherence. This is not a dramatic process. It rarely feels heroic. It often looks like choosing sustainability over intensity, depth over speed, alignment over admiration, which is precisely why it is resisted, because ego prefers altitude to orientation, and culture reinforces that preference. The quiet strength required to slow down, recalibrate, or change direction is rarely celebrated. It does not produce immediate results. It does not create spectacle, but it prevents the kind of collapse that no amount of intelligence can reverse. This is where the myth leaves its final impression, not as a lesson to obey, but as a mirror to consult. If this story resonates, it is not because of ancient Greece. It is because, at some point, you recognized a familiar tension, the pressure to rise, to accelerate, to justify potential, without being entirely certain where that movement was leading. The myth does not resolve that tension. It simply reveals it and leaves the responsibility of awareness with the listener.
Wow, powerful stuff. You have just completed a C2 level English listening experience. You followed a long, uninterrupted narrative built on abstraction, implication, and psychological depth. You engaged with ideas that were not explained directly, but unfolded gradually through reflection and pattern. Along the way, you explored themes of ambition, identity, limits, and self-sabotage as lived human experiences, not theoretical concepts. This was not a story about mythology. It was a story about orientation. Take a moment before moving on. And if you continue with the next episode, listen not to consume more content, but to notice more clearly. Because the most important shifts rarely announce themselves loudly. Goodbye.